Okay, welcome to Watson's Advocacy in Community. Let me silence my cell phones because they're suddenly popping off. Uh, so we have these quarterly meetings to replace what used to be our annual organizing assembly. We felt that we needed to have it more frequently, and so here we are. Um, and it's gone through several different names as well. We used to call them our In Lakesh meetings. However, we changed that recently to Advocacy and Community to more accurately reflect what we're doing and our goals here. So let's get started. We are recording this. We're only recording the whole group session and not the breakout sessions. So there will be no recording of the breakout sessions. But we wanted to capture especially our keynote panel discussion for that. Oh, let me go back to the title, Youth Advocacy in a World on Fire, because we are focused on youth agency this meeting, centering the advocacy and agency of youth that have been working with Oliver. And Oliver, I'm going to pass it off to you to explain that a little bit and why we're talking about youth agency in a world on fire.
Yeah, thanks. I think what we see over and over again, especially in the media and in like the political context, is just the uh, tokenization and some sort of symbolic leadership positions that young people are given, and they'll be on a task force, they'll be on a board, they'll be an ASB, they'll have these roles, and they'll just feel taken advantage of. They'll feel like they weren't really given any sort of power in making decisions, and they often come to us and they're like, how do we stop this from happening, and how do we actually you know build our political power together? And it's the motivation has come out of so many different youth orgs coming to us looking for resources and guidance without influence, overly influencing young folks. And the balance is so hard. And so we're just, I think, spending a lot of time and energy building those relationships and supporting young folks, you know, learn how to be advocates in these spaces for issues that matter to them. So it's kind of where it's come from.
Thank you. So I forgot to introduce myself too. I'm Tracy, Dr. Castro Gill. My pronouns are they, them, and I am Chicanekis, and I'm the executive director and co-founder of Washington Ethnic Studies Now. And I would like for each of you to put in the chat. We always do at Watson name, pronouns, race, and ethnicity, because just like gender, nobody should assume people's racial or ethnic identity. And then why you're here, who you're with, any other information you'd like to put in the chat, so we can get to know each other through the chat. And then Oliver also asked a prompt for 2025, what's out and what's in. So you see some people responding to that in the chat already. So you can also add that if you like. And then we're going to move forward. Anything else? Did I miss anything? No? Okay, nobody's telling me I missed anything. So we are a nonprofit organization. We run on donations. And so we are going to be doing a little fun fundraiser during this meeting. And it's a 50-50 raffle. I honestly never heard of a 50-50 raffle until one of our members, Dr. Velez, brought it up. And now I'm hearing it everywhere. So it's one of those things where somebody says it once and then it's popping up everywhere. And so the way it works is you can donate a specific amount of money. I think I made it increments of 5. So it says $5, and then you can like increase the quantity for however much you want to donate. And then tomorrow I'll go through that and randomly select a a winner, and the winner gets 50% of the pot, and Watson takes the other 50%. So it's a win-win for people, right? So if you would like to participate in the 50-50 raffle, there's the QR code or a bit.ly, and we'll show that several times throughout today's presentation. And then also, if you're joining me in the breakout, the first breakout, you will get a free Washington State Civics unit for high school that was written by Oliver. Oliver, do you want to say like a brief, like 30-second, 1 minute, what is this unit about?
Totally, yeah. It really goes through uh, a series of different skills and resources and tools that students have been asking for to engage in civics locally. It's a resource that kind of it shows what already exists in the state and then kind of provides resources around how to use those and how to use those critically. So things like Teach for TVW that the state provides that nobody really even uses. This will help you use that. And there's things like bill trackers, there's things like note taking for meetings, there's a lot of resources on how to organize, there's how to write op-eds, there's a lot of tools like that. So hopefully a fun, useful unit. And actually there's a little there's a mini unit within it that does a brief sort of LGBTQ civics in Seattle spotlight on the fight to save Denny Blaine beach, which happened recently that we were, a lot of people were a part of. And so there's like a little mini unit on that too, which is fun within it. But happy to answer questions later too. Thanks, Tracy.
Okay, sorry, I was answering an email about people having trouble logging in.
I'm responding to that
Okay. Okay. And then in addition to that, if you don't teach high school or Washington State Civics Unit, today only, it's the last day to get any curriculum 50% off. That includes units and individual lesson plans. They're all 50% off. So there's the coupon code, but we also have another, it's just 50%, it's 50% off, AIC 50, that's the coupon code. And then as always, we'd love to have you join us as a WASN sustaining member. Hopefully, if you're new to WASN and haven't been to one of our events before, you'll take away something about us and why it's important to help sustain the work that Washington Ethnic Studies now is doing. Okay. So here's our agenda. We always run behind time because that's just how we are. We over plan for everything and then we talk a lot. So welcome and introductions. We're supposed to start our keynote panel 3 minutes ago. So but first I want to just give you a super brief overview of who WASN is, and then we'll get to our keynote panel. Then Oliver is going to take us through Advocacy 101, like pretty much like where we are in the state in terms of ethnic studies and education and things like that, and then how we advocate as an organization. And then walk you through the legislative priorities with Sophia, who we'll introduce in a little bit. And then we have our breakout sessions. So session 1 is where you'll join me if you want to learn about the civics unit and get a free unit. You'll join Oliver and Sophia to learn about how they've been supporting youth advocacy through writing op-eds. And then session 2, we broke it out for youth only and adults only. Like adults are fine to go to the youth one, but the youth will be planning their youth advocacy summit, which we'll be talking about a little bit later. And then the adults will join me to talk about next steps and what we've set up for ways that you can support ethnic studies legislation this session. So who is WASN? We started technically in 2018. We weren't a nonprofit yet, and we were just a group of educators who needed support and needed community, because you shouldn't be doing ethnic studies outside of community. It should be a community endeavor. And so Dr. Curtis Acosta, if you've seen the movie Precious Knowledge, he's one of the educators from Tucson. He came out here to help us kind of figure out how to do that. And so we call him the godfather of WASN. And then here we have Dr. Kinoshita, who will be on the panel, Alma Alonso and Jennifer Dunn, who are all early WASN members, planning this first event, our first organizing assembly. And then we started meeting monthly after that. We figured we have this network of amazing educators. Let's do something with it. And we started thinking, well, we need to be influencing state policy. And so here is one of our early meetings with Senator Hasagawa. And we started to realize that if we wanted people to take us seriously, we needed to be a nonprofit organization. And so that's why we formed a 501c4, which gives us more political advocating abilities. And so we started having our yearly organizing meetings, teaching people how to organize and advocate for ethnic studies. And then we realized we needed to do that more regularly. So we split them into quarterly meetings. This is our mission and vision. You can go look at it on our website. I'm not going to read it, but basically we want ethnic studies everywhere, all the time. Most of our members are educators, but this is a breakdown from some data that we collect from members about who are WASN members. And then we have a liberation strategy. That's our word for a strategic plan. We focus on K-12 education only, advocacy, political advocacy, collectivism, and praxis. And I think praxis is really what differentiates us from other nonprofit organizations. And that's our commitment as the leaders of the nonprofit to being lifelong learners. And we're always learning and practicing what we teach people. And we also want to recognize that we stand on the shoulders of the people who came before us. So the picture on the left is a picture from the San Francisco State University student strike that birthed ethnic studies in the 60s. And then the picture on the right are the students from the Tucson Mexican American Studies program that was shut down because of racism in 2010. And their fight for ethnic studies really began like a renaissance, like a resurgence of ethnic studies, especially at the K-12 level. And then this was a slide from Oliver. Oliver, do you want to talk about this slide?
Yeah, that was just that we've been spending a lot of energy kind of getting the word out there. Every time we're talking to legislators, they say there's a public education issue around what is ethnic studies, and you all need to get out there and correct the messaging and tell us what it is. So, and which is ultimately you need to address all the scared white people that are anti-CRT and the sort of anti-CRT movement that's sort of emerged nationally, which actually started in Washington State thanks to somebody named Christopher Rufo, who's works for a bunch of right-wing think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and kind of was the one that launched the anti-CRT movement. So we've been trying to get into the media. You see Bruce Jackson in there. You see me in there. You see us, Tracy and I writing an op-ed. We really just trying to get the word out on and correct the narrative because unfortunately when we're doing political advocacy, shaping the public narrative on these things is an important part of advocacy. So that's been a strategy that we've always been implementing, but something we're launching more, trying to get in more different formats and mediums. So we're excited to talk a little bit about the youth, also the youth writing that we're going to be working on in the first workshop.
So that's WASN. I told you this slide would pop up several times. And we're going to transition to our keynote panel. One of our members, unfortunately, our youth advisory board member, James, came down with whatever is going around, which sounds nasty and horrible. So he's not going to be here. But I think I saw Priyanka and Kyle and Strada and Kaylee, and that's the rest of our panel. So I am going to, oh, and reminder, 50% off curriculum. I'm going to pass it over to Priyanka. Priyanka is she says here she's a founding member of our WASN Youth Advisory Board member. So most of the literature that you'll see on our website, Priyanka was part of creating that, and she joined us when she was, remind me, Priyanka, a sophomore or junior in high school.
Yeah, I think a sophomore in high school.
And now she's a junior at Harvard. She left Watson for a minute because she was like, no, I'm going off to college. But then she came back and she's like, y'all, Harvard sucks. I want to come back to Watson. And so I have to brag on that for a minute. um, and then our panelist, Dr. Kinoshita, like I said, he was original like founding member of Watson and has been a supporter. He's my chosen adopted father, Dr. Kinoshita. Kaylee Duong, who is a former member of the NAACP Youth Council, and has written a lot of the op-eds that are co-written, some of the op-eds that Oliver has been talking about. Shraddha Sharude is a board director, currently the vice president of Washington Ethnic Studies now. And then James was going to be here. He just joined the Wasson board, and we're happy to have him because he's an amazing youth leader. And so I'm going to pass it over to Priyanka, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen. So go for it, Priyanka.
Thank you for the introduction. Hi, everyone, and welcome again to the fourth quarterly Wasson Organizing Assembly Youth Agency in a World on Fire. Our keynote panel today aims to engage with the intersections of Asian American studies, anti-Blackness, and solidarity building. As we shift to a more toxic political climate, as we're all well aware, we're reminded of the rise of xenophobia and anti-Asian hate that our communities faced. We're also reminded how erasure has often been the brand of racism in our communities that our communities have been accustomed to. And when the shift to blatant violence occurs, anti-Blackness came to the forefront within our communities. Today's panel features youth and educator voices from various Asian ethnic groups, reflecting the diversity within the Pan-Asian community. However, as you may have noticed, there are no Black Americans on the panel, and this is intentional as the focus is on reflecting and reckoning with anti-Blackness within Asian American spaces. We aim to center the work that Asian Americans must do to build solidarity and confront anti-Blackness while modeling what it looks like to reflect on and address anti-Blackness without placing the burden of education on Black individuals. So, through our dialogue, we'll explore historical and contemporary frameworks like racial triangulation to understand how collective action, particularly through youth advocacy and ethnic studies, can empower all communities to dismantle racism. And we hope this space fosters accountability and a commitment to collective liberation as we explore the ways that our communities can work together towards justice and liberation. So we invite you to consider the questions you might have for panelists as you join us in this important conversation. And I'll just kick it off by allowing everyone to introduce themselves. I can begin just quickly. I know Tracy already went over a brief history of who I am, but I'm Priyanka. I'm a youth advisory board member at Wasson. I'm Asian Indian, and I'm a junior in college right now. And anyone, Kyle, if you want to jump in, you can go next.
Sure, I'll go ahead. I'm Kyle Kenosha. Tracy was good enough to introduce me. API, Japanese American, third generation member of the API community here in Seattle, and glad to be here. I guess I'm the community elder, I suppose, still getting used to that. But anyway, at one point in my life, I was a college activist for ethnic studies. So anyway, I'll pass it to Shraddha.
My name is Shraddha Shrude. I am Indian American or South Asian American. I am a math teacher at Cleveland High School, one of the founding board members here at Watson, and currently I am the vice president. I'm an immigrant, disabled woman of color. I'll just say all that. And I'll pass it to our youth, Kaylee.
Hi everyone. My name is Kaylee. I go by she, her pronouns. I'm a UW social work student and also studying ethnic studies. I was a former member and still helping out in a part of the NAACP Youth Council. I was also in the Equity in Education Coalition and also Puget Sound Educational Services District intern and I organize on campus and other stuff as well. And I'm Asian American. And then I don't know if there's anyone else I should pass it to.
Just a quick segue, I guess. So James, our panelist that wasn't able to be here today because he's sick, actually sent in his written answers to the questions. So as we go through the panel, I'll be posting his responses in the chat. So I'll post James' little introduction, and then we can move on to the next question, which is, as representatives of different Asian ethnic groups, how do you view the concept of a collective Asian American identity?
Take that one. I guess for me, I have like kind of mixed feelings about the collective Asian American identity. I think there's a lot of beauty in it. I think there's something to be said about that kind of collective solidarity, but I also think that there's a lot to say about the fact that we have all been told we are Asian, and yet there's really only one representation of what Asian actually looks like. And that creates that monolithic perception of who we are as a community that I am not particularly fond of. And I also think that it creates a lot of infighting within our community, and it essentially creates conflict because of the monolithic stories that are told of Asian people. And so while there can be really positive elements of having that collective identity, I think that because that collective identity was not one that was chosen by people who are represented in it, it created more conflict than it did solidarity.
Thank you for that. Would anyone else like to share their responses to this question?
So I actually also had like a similar response to Shata. Like I was thinking and reflecting back because in one of my ethnic studies classes, I actually wrote an essay about this, and how the Asian American identity and the Asian American movement was like the identity was a vehicle for political mobilization, but there was still so much limitations, because when we look at like the whole diaspora, the whole Pan-Asian American diaspora, like there were so many different issues. And if we go through with this identity as a monolith, as we can see today and see through many different spaces, that brings like, I wrote a lot about like, it brings limitations as it could still be a tactic to use to reproduce power instead of actually the purpose of um, critiquing power and resisting power. And like I actually wrote a little bit about like there was an activist, Helen Zia, who at this time she wasn't out as lesbian yet, but I wrote a lot about how she was reflecting her times in the 60s organizing because through the Asian American movement, she felt like she had to pick between two of her communities. Like she was met with a lot of homophobia. And I learned about that in my ethnic studies class, and it made me think a lot of like, like if we move through this identity as a monolith, it creates so much harm. And like later we're gonna go into like anti-blackness, which that can definitely come up when we're moving through this identity as a monolith instead of moving this identity as a diaspora and as so we can organize without having to have like what Shraddha was saying about like the monolithic stories that can create a lot of harm because there are so many this like identity has so many different people within it, from Southeast Asians to South Asians and the different experiences that come with it.
I'll just provide a much shorter answer. I agree with Shraddha and Kaylee that this was identity that wasn't created by us. It was forced upon us by the racial hierarchy that white supremacy created for us, basically a century and a half ago. So, that being said, so it is a category in society. If you look at a census form for a long time, a lot of folks who came in very separate diasporas are supposedly, one identity. But I think that, historically, uh, we as a community have, used that though as an opportunity to create all sorts of multiple solidarities, not only, among our separate communities, but as well creating solidarities between other communities as well, which, if you look at the history of the late 60s, a lot of Asian American activists came up because they were acting in solidarity with the Black community and Latinx community as well.
Thank you for that, Kyle. And that actually beautifully segues into our next question. To your point, we want you to help us understand the idea of racial triangulation. So could you just explain what is racial triangulation? Can you provide the historical context around its creation?
Sure. I got that question. I said, wow, you got a couple hours, but I'll give you the 3-minute version on what that is. So, racial triangulation is a construct created by scholar Clara Jean Kim, describing the multiple narratives that white supremacy has for Asian American identity in relation to both whites and blacks. So if you can imagine a triangle, if white supremacy is at one point of the triangle as a power that can create narratives, one vector is a narrative as us Asian Americans as perpetual foreigners who can't ever be assimilated, who also serve as a handy scapegoat for society's problems. So this racist narrative began, if you take ethnic studies, of course, began in the 19th century when our ancestors were lured here as cheap immigrant labor to help complete the colonization of the Western United States. And it's always lurked under the surface of our culture. So the anti-Asian racism that emerged during the pandemic wasn't really new. It was part of the same long-standing narrative of anti-Asian hate that killed Vincent Chin in the 1980s, that caused the incarceration of my family in World War II, and it spurred anti-Chinese and anti-South Asian riots of the 1800s. But there's another separate vector in Dr. Kim's triangle, that it's a construct that points to the position that white supremacy wants us to have in relation to blackness. And that's a familiar narrative of the model minority. So the model minority narrative was actually invented by white supremacy, not by our community. It began in the 1950s with the image of the patriotic good Orientals as opposed to the bad communist Chinese and North Koreans. And it morphed in the 1960s to the model minority narrative if you, quote unquote, work hard, be upright middle class citizens, and whatever you do, be silent and don't protest and accept racism. Then you'll get rewarded by proximity to whiteness. So in the 1960s, this narrative was weaponized against the militancy of the Black civil rights movement. And it's represented today by the fact that the leadership of the white racist anti-affirmative action movement all over the country is Asian American. People who weaponize their model minority identity to try and pit our community against Black and Latina communities. And it's represented whenever whites want us to diffuse movements like pan-ethnic studies, for example, by stripping away the anti-racist core and making it harmless multicultural education. So, the model minority narrative in Dr. Kim's triangle construct is how white supremacy would like us to manipulate our positionality. So you can see adopting the model minority narrative is not race neutral. It's always has been about toxic anti-blackness, which is why we as Asian Americans have to resist and reject this poisonous and anti-black racial triangulation. And of course, one way to do this is to do what we're doing today, using our activism to push forward pan-ethnic studies. So that's the 3-minute version. I encourage folks to look into our history to really understand it better.
Thank you, Kyle. Building off of that, Shraddha, how do you see the racial triangulation dynamic playing out in contemporary society, and how does it shape Asian American perspectives on anti-Blackness, in your opinion?
So similar to Kyle, I'm going to try to condense it. I did link the article that Kyle references into the chat, and I'd highly encourage folks to actually read through it because this for me, when I was first introduced to this concept of racial triangulation, was really what helped me to break out of the mindsets that I was taught, right? Because as Kyle said, these were not things that were within our own communities. They were essentially forced upon us. And just in present day, there's a lot of different spaces that these kinds of things happen. And I'm just going to provide a couple examples because I find that's the easiest way to really understand it. And one of those examples, I'm a teacher in Seattle Public Schools. And lately, right, there's been a lot of discussion and talk about the school closures. And things have shifted now compared to where they were, in November and December. But during that time, families were incredibly active trying to ensure schools don't close, right? And I started to notice a trend where many Asian parents who were advocating for their schools to not get closed or for the highly capable cohort program were starting not just to partner with white families, which is not the source of the problem, right? We don't. It is not a problem to partner with people of other races to uplift causes that benefit everybody. The issue started to happen where once Asian American parents were gaining voices, then suddenly the topic shifted from everybody deserves to have access to advanced learning if that's what their child needs over into, look, the district cares too much about Black people. And if you look at the number of Asian students now, look how we are being disserviced because they want to prioritize Black students. And it went from we want to uplift everybody, started gaining some power. Immediately, once you start feeling heard, suddenly the shift goes back into. And why is that? Because if you look at that racial triangulation, you're right here in the middle. And the moment you start to feel like you're coming up, wait, now who are we oppressing together? And it's the Black community. And that has been happening in so many different ways. And that was just one of the really clear present day, very recent examples. And it's not on purpose because it's coming from a place of feeling like we aren't being served. And the reality is that we are being served in the same way that the Black community has been being served. The issue is that when we start to get more, we decide to partner with the oppressor because of racial triangulation that was created. Yeah, and Oliver in the chat, right? Like we want to advocate for Asian American studies, but not ethnic studies. And it's actually one of the reasons, the reason that WASN really takes the approach of pan-ethnic studies is because it requires us to address anti-Blackness within our own communities. And, one last example, I think about colorism within Asian communities is very huge, right? We don't just have anti-Blackness in our communities, and just similar, right? Similar to other communities, Latinx, Black, etc. We have a lot of colorism, and so if you're whiter, you're more beautiful. What is that really coming from? Anti-Blackness. Because the root of racism is anti-Blackness. At WASN, we have defined whiteness as anti-Blackness because that is the core of it. When we feel like we need to whiten our skin to be beautiful. I think I'll close it there. I think I answered all the questions.
Perfect. Thank you, Shraddha. Thinking about kind of the application of that into our own like organizing efforts, what are the strengths and limitations of the collective Asian American identity in addressing anti-Blackness and fostering solidarity within Black communities or with Black communities?
I'm going to read James's answer out loud. A collective Asian American identity can be useful for mending the very broken relationship between Asian Americans and Black communities because it offers structural analysis of the way white supremacy has operated and the way each community views the other. Many Asian Americans have been positioned in a similar place relative to both whiteness and Blackness, and understanding that positionality within white supremacy can be a useful analytic. Yet it also can lead to fighting for liberation in isolation as opposed to in solidarity, sometimes useful, but also sometimes harmful. Movements against Asian American racism can fall into the trap of scapegoating Black Americans. So we must be careful to make our movements intersectional and solidarity based.
Is there anything anyone else would like to add on to that?
I had like a very similar response as James, and he explained that so well. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Kaylee. The next question is for Kaylee. What role do you believe youth advocacy plays in fostering solidarity between Asian American and Black students?
As I was like seeing this question, I was reflecting a lot on how important youth advocacy is in order to foster solidarity. We cannot foster solidarity without our youth being at the forefront of it because our youth is our future. And also, I was also thinking about like the historical context as well, where we think about like solidarity as I think Kyle was mentioning earlier, like a lot in the 60s of how a lot of Asian American activists um, not only were inspired, but they were working in solidarity with Black activists in the 60s. And I think that because our youth can shape the future, they can also look into the past and they can also reflect on what went well in organizing and what didn't go well. And I think that it plays a really huge role when we want to foster solidarity between Asian American and Black students because as we see now, especially with Trump's presidency, our education is on the line, and our students are the ones that are our students and educators are the ones that are facing the brunt of it all when there's cuts, when there's like school closures, etc. And I think that our youth advocacy, like it must be at the forefront when we're organizing because our youth are the ones with the experiences that they know what's going on in their schools. They know what's going on in other schools, and also they know what's going on in their community. And if our youth are the ones building their solidarity, I think that that leads a really strong path for liberation and for resisting white supremacy and recognizing and having these conversations that we're having today because anti-Blackness is so rooted within so many different communities, rooted in like so many different systems. And if we ignore that conversation, we cannot address that and we cannot be able to organize properly without addressing our internal issues. And as I was like reflecting a lot on this panel, I was thinking like we have external work where we're fighting white supremacy, but we also need to have internal work as well, where we are addressing anti-Blackness, we're addressing colorism, we're addressing issues within our community too, because we cannot do one or the other. We have to simultaneously do that. And I think that it ties in with youth advocacy because our youth are the ones like facing the current experiences now as they're like the ones that are most overlooked.
Thank you, Kaylee. This next question was also targeted at youth advocacy and activism and was directed towards James. So I'm going to put his response in the chat, and it actually has three parts. So perhaps if each of the panelists could each read one part of his response, that would be great. It's the first part.
I can read the first part. Those who strive for inclusive curricula often stop at the segmented edition of each racial and ethnic group, telling their stories in isolation and often exploring and then stopping at their relationship to whiteness. This often begins and ends at oppression narratives and works to recenter whiteness. Instead, ethnic studies offers a structural change that allows for an exploration of the complex relationships between ethnic groups. All of their strives and solidarities must be deconstructed to form new relationships in the present.
Go ahead.
Sure. I'll just add to that. I think that, that was a part of my life experience growing up here in Seattle that, really, first of all, it was a combination of both ethnic studies, understanding the history of my family's experience with racism, and then beginning to understand that it was a part of the same racism that oppressed, the Black community as well as Latino and Latina communities. In Seattle, if you study the history, it's so instructive because of redlining. The Black and Asian communities, both Chinese and Japanese and Filipinos, were segregated together. So in the 60s, when Black activism came about, a lot of the Asian American youth saw that as a channel to actually, oppose the racism that they saw in societies against their families as well. You have, for example, in Seattle, anyways, a lot of young people sympathizing and supporting the Black Panthers to the point where you had one or two Japanese American members, for example. So I think that studying our history, and this is not an abstract idea. Studying our history, is an important way for folks to understand the inherent solidarities that Asian Americans and the Black community has.
Thank you.
James actually says, like, right after that, exactly what you were just saying. The complex history between Asian American and Black struggle cannot be ignored like they are right now. As a student of a predominantly Asian and white school, I know many of my Asian American peers feel disconnected during our unit on Black Americans and reduce them to objects of studies. Ethnic studies introduces interrelationship between groups, understanding their relative privileges or positions of power, which can combat the ignorance we see in the status quo.
Then there's also just this one last part. Kyle, if you'd like to read it out loud from James's response.
Okay, let's see. Where does that start? I think the part
Scroll
about
all the way to the bottom.
all the way to the bottom.
Yeah, the most recent message.
Not the
Wow.
one that Tracy just sent.
Okay, not the one that Tracy. Okay, I may be repeating, but I'll go ahead and read that entire quote.
That's the one that Kaylee read, right?
The beginning with Asian American struggles.
Yes, read that one.
Okay, so Asian American struggles must not only be discussed in the context of whiteness. When we talk about the model minority myth, there's a valid argument to be had about the harms that it brings to Asian Americans. But that conversation cannot be at the expense of how it was and is a tool of anti-Blackness. Ethnic studies allows for these conversations about power relationships between groups without an environment of blame or guilt, opening up a space for new potential solidarities by allowing us to understand the social context of our actions in the present, past, and future.
Thank you. And then to wrap everything up, I have one question left for all of you. Drawing from your own identity and experiences, how do you hope individuals in the Pan-Asian community will take to challenge anti-Black? That was a little weird. How do you hope individuals in the Pan-Asian community will challenge anti-Blackness and build solidarity?
Well, I think it's important. I think Freda gave an example of how, because of racial triangulation, you have folks in our own communities taking stands that are essentially anti-Black. And I think it's important to step up and stand up and speak out, not only against those voices, but, you know, in open solidarity with, you know, Black and other communities who were oppressed. I think that's important because, you know, we have to be visible and, you know, not allow, you know, these folks in our communities who embrace anti-Blackness to appear that they have, you know, a singular voice, that they speak for Asian Americans. Um, so, you know, we have to have our own voices independent that, you know, speak clearly in support of, you know, Black and other struggles.
Thank you, Kyle. Shraddha or Kaylee, do you have anything to add?
I think when I think about this question and I'm thinking about my own personal experiences, what I think about is trying to think of the right words to say it succinctly. We intentionally chose, right, to not have Black folks on our panel today because what our goal was to model for folks how you talk about Blackness, how you, or sorry, anti-Blackness, and your role within dismantling it, right? We're not here representing Black views, and we're not here asking a Black person to try to teach anyone about the Black experience, because dismantling anti-Blackness is not about Blackness. Dismantling anti-Blackness is about dismantling white supremacy. It's about disrupting the intentionally created racial triangulation that is a tool of white supremacy that not only creates barriers and rifts between the Asian and Black communities, but also within our Asian communities, right? And when I think about what I hope people will take away and use to challenge anti-Blackness is to remember that conversations about anti-Blackness are not about Black people. They are not about Blackness. They are about dismantling white supremacy and reflecting on the ways that we have engaged in white supremacy to oppress Black communities in order to lift ourselves up, which is not actually ever going to happen. And I'll end with this, and that is, I'm a math teacher, so let me just explain something very briefly, and that is that these are two lines, and when we have racial triangulation, no, a line will never change slope. You will always be, no matter how high up you think you are, white people will go up higher, because that's what a line is. That's how lines work. There is no change in the slope. You will always be below, because that is what racial triangulation is. That is what white supremacy is. So no matter how far you try to take yourself away from Blackness, you won't reach where you're trying to go. But you can come here and make that solidarity happen at that intersection of Asianness and Blackness to find solidarity within each other. Like, that's an intersection, two lines that intersect. You don't have to try to lift yourself up, because you won't reach where you're trying to go.
And that was explained very beautifully. I wanted to also add on to the conversation as well. And I think that I hope individuals in the Pan-Asian community will take the time to like actually have those conversations. And also, I think back to like the question earlier about like ethnic studies and like the inclusion of Asian American histories and its intersections with Black struggles is so, so important, because like Oliver was saying in the chat earlier, there's like a Asian American like history bill, but there's no bill for ethnic studies. And I think how like if we're isolating this identity as a monolith, it's so harmful. And I hope that the Pan Asian community will take on like the need to challenge the anti-Blackness in our community and have these conversations and also act upon that, because we can't just like talk about it once and like forget about it. We need to continuously grow and talk about it and continuously, like Shana was saying, like dismantling white supremacy within our communities, because white supremacy wants all communities of color, all marginalized communities to be fighting with each other, because that is what it enables in our systems, and how important solidarity is, because um, that's what white supremacy is scared of. It's scared of solidarity, and that's why there's racial triangulation. That's why they're purposely like intentionally trying to get, like trying to put anti-blackness and root it. So I think that this conversation is extremely valuable, and I think that it is important to continuously reflect, continuously hold your own self accountable, and hold your communities accountable as well of anti-blackness. And I think that um, I'm really grateful to be here and have that conversation. I hope that individuals in the Pan Asian community um, takes that on as well, and especially if, as I would say, especially if I think in the community in general, but also especially if you're an organizer, or especially if you're in education, because that also heavily impacts that too. But I also think everybody in the community should have this conversation.
Thank you, Kaylee. With that, we're gonna wrap up our panel. Thank you so much for the panelists and for everyone for listening, and hearing what they all have to say. I'll pass it off to Tracy.
Thank you, everybody. Um, I learn so much all the time. I love, like, I'm always stressed out about like planning these events and like organizing these events, but I always love how much I learn from these events. So thank you, everybody, for teaching me today. And I'm actually gonna pass it off to Oliver because he will be
Running a little bit of a Kahoot game for us. A bit of a shift of gears.
yes.
Thank you all. I love an intergenerational panel. It's rare we get to see people of very different generations. Sorry, no, not to call you out, but it's really it's really nice to see. I went ahead and shared my screen and shifting gears very much to Kahoot, which I hope everyone can go to kahoot.it, and then the pin is there. I'm actually just going to change my screen over to Kahoot. If you haven't played, then you haven't taught middle school, probably, or been in middle school in the last 15 years. But hopefully we can learn a bit about the legislature without just talking about it and do a little playing. Tracy and I did this Kahoot with a bunch of people at a conference in Tacoma, and people actually really enjoyed it and learned a lot. So we thought we'd do it again and play as we learn about what is kind of can be very boring. Every state legislature works differently. So if you're thinking, oh, now I know how every state works, you do not. Washington is a different system than every other state. So we're learning about Washington. Wow, this is a packed Kahoot. It's about to be exciting. We'll give people another minute or two to get in. I know this isn't a middle school class because none of y'all's names are like poopy farts or, something ridiculous, which is usually what happens. All right, we got 20.
They do that at the high school level too. I had seniors and I had somebody who was like OG, like I'm trying to remember what the last word it was like OG farts, something like that.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. Unless anyone else logs in, I'm going to give it just a minute.
Oh my
Okay.
God, you can now accessorize your character?
I have the most basic version of Kahoot, and they make you go through all these hoops when you have the basic version that's unpaid. So till we get all that big money, we won't have a. But I didn't know you could customize it on the basic. Okay, we're at 22. Does anybody need time to get in? Speak now. All right, we're doing it. You can play along in your head too. It's pretty, you don't need it. All right. Ethnic studies at the Washington State Legislature. Question 1. When does the 2025 legislative session begin? It lasts all year
Wait,
long.
I'm not seeing the things.
Oh, you're not seeing the options?
Mm-mm.
Can't see
On,
any of the question or the answer options.
on the share screen?
Yeah.
Oh,
Try it stopping sharing and resharing and then go full screen.
can you see it now?
There we go. Can you go full screen too?
I'm when I went full screen, it stopped sharing, so I'm gonna leave it at this. Uh-oh. Well, this one was a bit of a bust, but we've got January 13th is when it starts, which is in about 9 days. So we have 9 days to the legislative session begins. Dang, Alexis is on top. All right, we'll make this more. Hopefully, y'all can see it. How long does the legislative session last? It lasts all year long. It lasts 90 days. It lasts 105 days, ending April 27th. It lasts as long as it takes. Right. Well, we got 22 answers. I think people are pretty locked in on this one. Sessions last different amounts depending on the year. On odd years like 2025, the session lasts 105 days. So it is a long session, which means we're actually going to be talking about the operating and capital budgets this session for the next 2 years. On the even years, they're 90 days, and that is when you deal with making the supplemental budget, which is kind of how to correct the budget for the last year of the biennium. So this is a big year. The budget, which the governor just actually released last month, is going to be debated and discussed throughout the legislative session. Okay, wow, Alexa's still in the lead. Must be pulling the trigger quick. Question number 3. How many legislators do we have in Washington State? 49 in the Senate, 98 in the House, thousands of them, as many as corporations we have, and funny question. This one, whoever wrote these answers, it's kind of given this one. We have 49 legislative districts, and in each legislative district, you have one senator and you have 2 representatives. It is a funny question. Shout out to those who blew that one. Wow, Jack coming up. All right, number 4. What happens during the interim, the rest of the year when the legislature is not in session? Legislators do nothing. Legislators take vacation, do their other jobs, and refuse to meet. Or legislators do their other jobs, meet with constituents and other lawmakers. This one's controversial. I think it really depends on which legislator is doing the job. Legislators have other jobs. Some of them even hold other offices like local school board members. To give you all a little bit of tea, in the 34th district, the senator, Joe Wynn, is going to be appointed as the director of the Department of Commerce by Ferguson. I think it's already been announced. And so Representative Alvarado is going to be appointed, most likely, this is all still TBD, but as the senator in that district. And so there's going to be a need for a representative. And so what the rumors are on the street is that Evan Briggs, the school board director, is going to be running for appointment of the representative of the 34th, which is like West Seattle, Burien, sort of that area. So we very well likely will have a new representative in office as a Seattle legislator. We also in the 48th, which is like Sammamish, Renton, and North Bellevue. Sorry, Seattle, Red. I don't know what I'm saying. Sammamish, Bellevue area. They're going to have a new appointment, which is most likely going to be Osman Saladin, which is actually good for ethnic studies because we'll have two new representatives who are allies of ethnic studies in the legislature. And Emily Alvarado becoming a senator is really good for ethnic studies because she was the one that sponsored the amendment to the genocide education bill last session. So lots of changes that are happening in the legislature right up into the last minute, and we won't even know some of these appointments for the coming weeks. So it's going to be a bit of a mess here at the legislature. A lot of changes and a lot of new faces. Sorry, I went on a tangent on that one, but we're learning as we learn.
I'd just like to say they told me I was in 23rd place, and I'm a little offended by that, given that there's only 22 people.
Ethnic studies is required by law for K-12 schools in Washington State. True or false? Man,
And
y'all are
don't
fast.
think just because you don't have it at your school doesn't mean it's not required, because since time immemorial is required and a lot of schools don't teach it. So
Okay. Wow, split choice on this one. Ethnic studies is not required by law according to the RCW, which is the Revised Code of Washington. It is currently encouraged by law, which means you don't have to do it. Uh, Pretty much about 50% of schools provide ethnic studies materials across the state, but what's classified as ethnic studies materials is very much open to interpretation. All right, Kaylee's coming up. It's good to see. All right. What does the state currently have in place for supporting ethnic studies implementation? The Ethnic Studies Advisory Committee, a 34-page handbook, OSPI Ethnic Studies Program Director, or nothing at all? This one's a tricky one. Lots of potential answers on the board. All right. Well, in 2020, there was an ethnic studies advisory committee that some of the folks in this room were on, and lasted to 2020. I think it was 2021, 22, and it was disbanded. And they published a 34-page handbook, which many of the folks in this room were a part of creating, if not fundamental in creating. That's all that exists now, is a framework for educators, and there's nobody overseeing ethnic studies at OSPI. But there isn't nothing at all. Oh, shifts. Wow, Jack, big drop there.
That's a jip. That last answer is a jip because there's
Got you. Schools are fully funded and not facing deficits statewide. This one I just worked in here. Just that's kind of a rude question. Well, we're seeing deficits statewide in over, I think, 9 or 10 districts. We have them being defaulting and being taken over by the state. So yeah, this one's a gimme. Oh, okay, Kaylee. It's kind of cheating. I don't know. Testimony can be given during the legislative session, both remotely and in person in Olympia. This one's important. As we're approaching the legislative session, we're going to have opportunities to be testifying for bills, and COVID did something that was really great, which opened up the opportunity for remote testimony and made it a lot more accessible. I actually find it even easier to sign in for testifying at the state ledge than in Seattle, in the Seattle City Council. And they have continued that practice after a lot of fighting by different community activists and organizers to keep the remote testimony. Okay. Changes. RCW, Revised Code of Washington number, states that all students should be global citizens in a global society, and standards must be periodically updated to incorporate best practices in ethnic studies, or standards must be reviewed by educators and students, or student standards must be determined by administrators. This one's kind of a complicated question. RCW is the name for our code of law, the Revised Code of Washington. 28A is where most of the education policy lives. And this is the actual words of the law, that the standards must be periodically updated to incorporate best practices in ethnic studies. So why is this important is that we pretty much, when this law passed in 2019, we've pretty much made the case this session that the state needs to be doing something to actually continue the implementation of incorporating best practices in ethnic studies. They're not doing anything to do that. So when we approached agencies and legislators, we cited this law as pretty much the justification for why they needed to invest more money in implementing ethnic studies. So this session, we've been working with Representative Santos to develop what is called a budget proviso on ethnic studies, which is not a bill, but a line item within the budget to invest in ethnic studies. There is a growing misinformation campaign to drum up fear about ethnic studies. I talked about this one a little bit earlier. We've been blessed, Washington Ethnic Studies now specifically, by being the target of some of the anti-CRT and anti-ethnic studies movement that is mostly led by right-wing folks. We'll see them in public testimony. We did already this fall when we were testifying at the school board, the State Board of Education. There were a lot of folks testifying against ethnic studies being a part of the State Board of Education's legislative priorities. But because we whipped some of the most amazing people who were in this group to testify, we fought against that, and they really liked our public testimony, and they included it in their legislative priorities for this session. So that was a win. Legislation is introduced from December through January. True or false? This one's kind of a gimme. Starting December, the first week of December, bills are introduced, and they're introduced a couple weeks into the session, so you still have a little bit more time. There's a January 30th cutoff for budget provisos that we're kind of working up against right now, trying to convince legislators to sponsor one of our budget provisos. That is our current struggle. Okay, last question. This election will well, this was from November. This is an outdated question, but this election, we changed our governor, a bunch of legislators, our superintendent, and many other state offices. Is it true or is it false? Did we?
Except we didn't change our superintendent. We have the same shitty superintendent who says he supports ethnic studies, but actually doesn't.
Yes, that is the case. All right, folks. That was what I got for our Kahoot. I hope we did some learning. Oh, Sophia with the third place.
No, she got third place. Sophia, that's
Corrupted.
cheating. You know all the answers. Cheater.
I tried going really slow and then on accident.
And shout out Jack, though. Jack hasn't seen this before, and Alexis, I'm not sure if you've seen it before. Wow,
Wait,
Bruce.
are all of these people except for Bruce Youth?
I mean, the youth probably have the fastest reaction time. Oh, wow, I like this. Look at Bruce's
This is
face.
amazing. Please
Come
screenshot
on,
this,
that
Tracy,
34
or
page
someone.
handbook I forgot about. That's so
Bruce,
old.
take a picture. Take a picture, Bruce. This is for your Facebook.
Bruce has the amazing tradition of taking the most candid, awful screenshots of screens. I love it.
If you ever find any ugly picture of me, know that Bruce posted it.
All right.
I'm
Well,
very
congratulations, Alexis, Jack, and Sophia. That was a huge win for the community. All right, Bruce, you have your photo?
yes, I do.
Solid. All right. Well, speaking of Sophia, who is a cheater, but we love her nonetheless, we're gonna kind of co-present this next session, and let's see if I can get it into presenter view.
I don't think we've officially like introduced Oliver and Sophia in your roles at Lawson. So if you could start this next section with that. Who are you and how are you affiliated with Lawson?
That is a great question. Hi, I'm Oliver Miska. I use they or he pronouns. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Wasson, and I'm kind of a Seattle Public School substitute a couple days out of the year, um, and have the pleasure of working with Sophia, who can introduce herself.
Yes, I can introduce myself. So my name is Sophia. I use she, her pronouns. A little bit about me. I am a current UW student. I'm in my like final year, but I am from Central Washington. So I come from like families of immigrants from Mexico and El Salvador. And yeah, I've just had a lot of experience in different community-based organizations, and I've been really passionate about like education policy. So my role here at Wasson is a youth program manager. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with youth who have already been in this work and being able to build different coalitions with different organizations. And yeah, you'll hear a little bit more about the work that we've been doing throughout this. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Well, Sophia, just we're kind of building off here on the Kahoot game, and if I wanted to go in a little bit more into depth of how a bill was passed real quick, we don't have to spend a ton of time on the slide, but um, you want to kind of give us a quick overview of the steps here?
Yeah, so I feel like also these next few slides are part of a presentation that we were creating. It's like legislative advocacy like 101 that we're making for our youth summit that we'll talk about a little bit later. But being able to like share like to youth and other community members like what the legislative process is like. So starting on Monday, next Monday, the 13th, is when, the session will start. And so we're just looking at the process of what it looks like for a bill to like actually make it through and become law. So like this first part kind of just looks at like the different committees that the bill has to go through in order to like pass. So it first begins in the policy committee that it is like a part of. So like for example, education policy would be in the education committee. And that committee would work on the bill and be able to send it to the fiscal committee. And that is the committee in which like they talk about the costs and being able to see if there's financial support for that bill. And then once those things are finalized, it will go into the chamber floor, which would either be the House or the Senate, in which all members would discuss whether that bill be passed onto the next House and or Senate, and kind of go over that same process until it reaches the governor's desk, and then becomes passed. There's a lot of like points in which people are like discussing and commenting on it, as well as different moments where it could like not pass, just because there are many different people it has to like be approved by in order to pass.
Is it true that we can give testimony in both the policy and the fiscal committee?
I believe that is true.
True.
Yes.
And then on the chamber floor, we often work with legislators to have they give testimony to bills. And so we support legislators by giving them talking points if we want them to testify on the chamber floor, oftentimes. But yeah, thank you for explaining that. And most education policy will start in the education committees. The one question that people might have is sometimes they'll put identical bills and they'll start it in the House and in the Senate, and that's called a companion bill. And so when midway through the session comes up, one of those bills will go through and one of them will die off. So this is just a quick little timeline. The interim is May through December. The session will begin the second Monday of January every year. A bill has to get through the first chamber within the first 59 days of session on these long sessions. So it has to get through all three, the policy, the fiscal, and the floor within those 59 days. And then it has to get through the second chamber 94 days into session. And then there's about 10 days of final negotiations and sort of alignment and what's called concurrence. So they have to chat between the chambers for those final days, and the session will end on the 27th. So we've got, and the governor has 20 days to take action. He can remove sections, but not lines. And there's a lot of different kind of details of what that process looks like, but detailed to go into. We'll share these slides, but there's a link to the legislative calendar from the website as well. But we wanted to just give a little bit of what to expect because this session, what we're working on, as we've mentioned, is the big debate around ethnic studies has been, do we mandate ethnic studies right now, or do we invest in the implementation of ethnic studies right now? And what Lawson and a lot of community advocates have been afraid of is mandating forces government agencies to then create a checkbox as quick as possible to say, this is what ethnic studies is. Okay, we're mandating this without doing the background work of really investing in developing what is ethnic studies before we mandate it. So Wasson's legislative priorities were not to create a mandate for ethnic studies, but to really start investing in teacher preparation programs and creating a director in the office of the superintendent to sort of oversee this work. And those were two things, and maybe Sophia, you want to chime in here, like what do we, why are we investing in, why are we calling for investing in teacher preparation instead of mandating? Like what, it's kind of a chicken or the egg situation, but do you want to speak a little bit more to this?
Yeah, I feel like something like in my own personal experience, as both like someone who hasn't had the proper resources to teach in a certain way to like promote ethnic studies curriculum and also being in like a student in a regular Washington State classroom, um, I think that there is a lack of having the proper resources to effectively teach ethnic studies. And I know that there was a report that Dr. Castro Grow wrote about how a lot of teachers don't have the proper resources. And like, even if they are well intentioned in the way that they um, want to teach ethnic studies, there's a lot of like bias, and I don't know if I'm saying that word, bias, and having to provide their own curriculum that also has its own like flaws. And so I think that being able to prepare teachers um holistically is the most important way to like build a important like long-term sustaining foundation to ethnic studies like across the state. Because we can mandate it like Oliver was saying, but if we don't have it to be meaningful and sustainable, then it's not really worth investing at all.
100%. Yeah. And this was a good selling point for legislators, and Representative Santos we worked with all throughout the interim until the last couple of months, which, just to give you some window into what advocacy looks like, she's been incredibly non-responsive for the past like 3 months. And after making serious promises to us to write a budget proviso to implement this first one, to start working on our teacher prep programs and creating an endorsement for ethnic studies, she full promise. There's been some drama at the legislature, it seems like, and she no longer has her legislative aide. So she's not responding to emails until she's actually back at work. And so there's been a lot of, it's just a very difficult and not very transparent process, and something like that we want to be open with, that like our advocacy work hinges on the responsiveness of our legislators, and they will sometimes they won't respond and make it really difficult for us to know how to continue to advocate for this work. So just wanted to name that as we're moving through. The second of our legislative priorities, we worked with OSPI to develop a budget proviso draft. And so we have language that's drafted ready to be included into our budget for this session, but we need a sponsor still for that second budget proviso. And that's something why I mentioned those appointments earlier is we're reaching out to those new folks, those new faces to say, hey, is it too, can we get you to sponsor this legislation? We hear you're getting appointed. So that's kind of our strategy right now in these last, couple weeks before the deadlines hit. So we launched a website that's our legislative committee website where you can find more about our work. Right now you can sign on and endorse our legislative priorities, which is one great way to support us. And you can also email our legislators. That's so important. There's 2 quick links. They take very little time to do. And you can also, there's tabs for reading us in the media, a whole list of articles, how to join our organizing meetings, and more legislative resources. Definitely recommend checking out our website. It's very cute. This is a kind of just where you could go right now. If y'all haven't signed on to our legislative priorities, it is, I'll put it in the chat. It is, you can go on and maybe we'll just take a minute here if folks are interested.
We have time for that in the second breakout with me, so you don't need to take time for it now.
Okay, cool. Well, then I will continue us on. We also are providing folks this session a bill tracker. It is currently empty because we have been taking breaks and resting and not doing anything, which is so lovely. But we have the daunting task of going to this link here, which I wanted to provide. And these are all of the bills that have already been pre-filed. As you can see, there's going to be hundreds, and there will be thousands, but we're going through these bills, seeing which ones are important, interesting to us. So these are where we will be pulling our pre-filed bills from and putting into our tracker, which is a resource for community to look at and to use to track bills that might be of interest to you. We're going to be mostly tracking education policy bills in this tracker. Sophia, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I feel like I also wanted to just like something that I like entering into the like role that I'm in is like understanding what Wassen's like legislative I guess goal was, because typically in other spaces it's like, oh, we're like sponsoring this bill and we're working on this bill specifically. And I think that what's interesting for this session is that Boston won't have their own bill, but is like advocating for the budget proviso, like Oliver was saying. And so something that I hope that like the youth team will be able to work on is like using this bill tracker to advocate for bills that we want to see passed, and like also supporting the budget proviso. So yeah, I think that was just important to name.
Yeah, and I think that's a good transition to kind of what the work is that y'all do. The youth advocacy team that Wasson has, and I let you speak to it. We meet every other Thursday in the evenings, and sometimes that changes around, but it's evenings are usually best for the students, and we meet and we're planning right now. Not only did we plan some of the panel and these breakouts, but we're planning a February 1st advocacy summit where we're inviting legislators and a bunch of different youth orgs. But I'll shut up. Sophia, you can kind of speak to our team.
Yeah, so we're a team of different youth organizers who are active not only in Boston but also other spaces. So like we have like a partnering organization. So some folks are involved with the Seattle Student Union, NAACP, Washington Bus, and Black Lives Matter at school. And so it's just kind of a coalition where we can support one another in our own like priorities as youth and being able to like have a space where we can like support each other not only through legislative like advocacy, but also through community support. And so we've been working on some different projects throughout the last couple months since school has started. So we've done some like writing projects. Our biggest focus right now has been hosting the Youth Advocacy Summit, which is like our big community event, which we'll talk about in a little bit, or maybe now. And then also as session is starting, I'm really hoping to be able to provide support for folks to be able to continue legislative advocacy or to like begin getting engaged in that. Because from my own experience, some of these organizations like the Washington Bus were outlets for me as a young person to be able to get involved. And so I'm just hoping to continue that within WASN. But yeah, I can talk a little bit about the Youth Advocacy Summit. So this is an event that is going to be happening February 1st, so next month. And it's kind of a just a big community event where we're having different community organizations and other like young people to join. I do want to like preface that like in my own experience in working in nonprofit organizations, when I've had to like host events, there have been a lot of like loopholes and like different steps I've had to take in order to like create an event like this. But something I've appreciated about being in Wasson is that like someone mentioned it in like one of our youth meetings, like, oh, it'd be fun to host like an event, like a little workshop or something. And I've been really grateful for all the support that we've gotten from Wasson because they're like, okay, go ahead. There hasn't been much of that like loophole stuff that I've had to work through previously. So I'm really excited that we've been able to like bring this about. But yeah, we're basically just going to have all different organizations present who they are and their legislative priorities to different participants. This will include workshops for legislative advocacy, different breakout rooms where we'll talk about how to engage in the legislature and how to talk with our legislators. And yeah, all of this has been done by our youth team. We've done a lot of outreach and resource building, and they're going to be the ones leading the workshops. And it just goes to show that we need to continue doing this work and have the support to do those things by bringing people like across the state, especially from someone from Central Washington. I don't always have these opportunities, so we're trying to make it as accessible as possible. Um, but yeah, so during this time, we'll be learning how to like track bills, take actions in committee, and joining different organizations. So if you know of any buddy who would be interested in like helping support host this event or just being a participant, there's the QR code to like sign up and learn more about at the event. But yeah, that was a lot, but it's coming really soon and we'll have like more time to like work on it and we hope to see um, young people and others, community organizers there. But yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, and the last 30 or 40 minutes of this event will include legislators who we've invited. We met with Senator Peterson a couple months ago and invited him, and that is a big deal because he's the Senate Majority Leader. And so having somebody like him there, and I've also invited a number of other folks and kind of waiting to hear back on if they're RSVPing, but it'll be a great time for us to kind of speak to our legislators and work with each other as different youth groups. So I'm super excited to be hosting that. And Washington Bus and is one of our strong partners on that, and excited to see folks from the Washington Youth Alliance here today. And actually was just talking to Chayton today on text and excited to partner with y'all this session too.